Ethnic Education, Addressing Racial Divide in the American Classroom. Hello, I'm Paul Karpuzis, and today I will be speaking from the philosophical lens. This is Marie, who will be speaking from the historical lens, and Jacob, who will be speaking from the cultural lens. Before we dive into our research regarding ethnic studies courses, I would like to tell a story about an African-American woman named Dorinda Carter Andrews. She grew up in the late 70s, early 80s, and went to schools considered racially desegregated schools. She's from Atlanta, Georgia, and speaks with a slow southern accent. She's also very smart. Most of her homework and schoolwork came easy to her, and because she wasn't being challenged in school, she would get bored with her work and act up. She was in first grade, and that's what first graders do. However, her teacher picked up on her poor behavior and sent her to the office one day. The office had called her parents and suggested she be tested for special education. They called the mom, and the mom refused and demanded that her child be tested for gifted and talented education. The school was forced to follow the request, and they gave her the test for gifted and talented education. And she ended up scoring on a 4th grade level and ultimately skipped 2nd grade, went from 1st to 3rd. This teacher failed to recognize the intelligence of Andrews because of implicit biases she held in poor training that didn't teach her how to accommodate and work with black students. Her teacher directly related her poor behavior to race. This is one of many problems in public schools across America. Due to colorblindness, corrupt traditional pedagogy, and majority white environment, schools have created a large racial divide in the student body. This brings us to the question, to what extent do ethnic studies classes help close the racial divide in schools? If we acknowledge race to eliminate colorblindness, practice the proper pedagogy, and diversify teaching staffs, we can implement all of these into ethnic studies courses and help to close the racial divide in schools. Now I will turn to Marie, who will tell you more about colorblindness through the historical lens.
Okay, so as a group, we've agreed that in order to address racial problems and close a racial divide, we need to acknowledge that a racial divide exists. Melody Hobson, a business leader of Ariel Investments, an African-American woman, describes colorblind behavior as a learned behavior in which we pretend not to notice race. In historical events such as lynchings, the taboo surrounding these events is caused by white guilt and turns into silence so that whites can feign innocence regarding the matter, even though, as Ida B. Wells, civil rights journalist, points out, lynchings were perpetrated by many white people regardless of their age or social class. Robin DiAngelo gives another reason for colorblindness. As a diversity educator, she attributes colorblindness to the desire of white people to attribute their own success to purely their own merits and hard work, rather than accept that they have white privilege and that has helped them along in life. Dr. Jennifer Muller adds that ignoring race and the privilege it generates benefits a white hegemony or power structure, and because that power structure will never be questioned if people ignore its existence. So altogether, many scholars agree that colorblindness reinforces white dominance and altogether prevents social progress. So the logical conclusion from this would be that all Americans must acknowledge race as a significant factor in society, and then we will be able to identify racial problems and work towards their solutions. Now I'll send this back to Paul for the philosophical lens.
Thanks, Marie. Philosopher and author Paulo Freire explains many styles of teaching in his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Current school systems include curriculums that encourage the banking method of teaching. This is the method of teaching where teachers put information into the brains of students for them to commit to memory without them being allowed to ask questions regarding what they're learning. Non-white students must be able to engage in class and share their stories in a white environment for acknowledgement and change to occur. It is also crucial that white teachers and non-white students build relationships to overcome implicit biases in poor education, but no relationship can be built between a teacher and student through a cycle of lecturing and taking notes. While this teaching practice continues in classrooms, the student body will continue to grow, racially divided, and the achievement gap will grow. Contrary to the banking method, critical pedagogy is a solution. It is a style of teaching that involves the students. The teacher sits in a circle with the students and engages each one of them. Freire describes this theory of critical pedagogy as a classroom where the teachers and students learn together, ask questions together, and reflect together. This pedagogy is friendly to non-white students with a white teacher because their teacher approaches discussion in a less instructive manner. Freire says leaders who do not act dialogically but insist on imposing their decisions do not organize the people but instead manipulate them. The manipulation Freire talks about is the racial divide that public schools create in the student body through the banking method I discussed earlier. Now here's Jacob, who will talk about diversifying schools through the cultural lens.
Through my research, I found that in U.S. schools, it makes a classroom culture that isn't racially diverse. According to Kay Truster, who has earned her PhD in educational studies, 82% of U.S. teaching workforce are white teachers. This creates a white setting that appeals to white students, which allows them to perform at a higher academic level in comparison to black students. This also allows them to be picked for gifted programs, again, at a higher rate compared to black students. Annie Gunderson earned her bachelor's degree in education, and she states that black students are 3 times more likely to be assigned to a gifted program by a black teacher. Again, this white setting does not allow for the same success with black students. Due to the favoriting of white students by white teachers, this creates an implicit bias towards black students, which doesn't view them as highly compared to white students. And the solution to that would be to diversify teaching staffs, which would allow for the academic success of black students in comparison to white students. Back to Marie for our solutions.
Okay, so of the 3 solutions that we have given so far, we believe we can implement all of them within an ethnic studies course. The similarities that our solutions have is that all 3 require teachers to make a change to accommodate race. What Paul was talking about, Dorinda Carter has offered the viewpoints of teachers on the subject. So teachers have 2 main points. One, they believe that they will not have time to go over these sensitive topics within the curriculum that they are already scheduled to teach, or they are afraid that admitting their own biases will lead to bad reflection on their part as a teacher, since teachers are supposed to be an objective figure in the classroom. Either way, these behaviors fall right into what D'Angelo describes as colorblind behavior. I have already gone over how colorblindness is damaging and prevents social change, so logically, these colorblind behaviors of teachers need to change. It is easier to be colorblind, but ignoring problems will not solve the problems. As a group, we recommend that ethnic studies courses are implemented at a high school level because ethnic studies courses have the potential to satisfy all 3 of the solutions we have talked about. An ethnic studies course would ideally follow the critical pedagogy that Paul was discussing. It represents non-white students and staff by giving them a voice and a place to facilitate discussion on race, which affects them so much. And most importantly, it allows students and teachers alike to acknowledge race as a significant factor so that we can identify racial problems and move forward to finding their solutions. Thank you.